Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to the start of a new series that I'm calling Political History of the United States. And when I say political history, I'm not just talking, who was in control, election results, that sort of thing. I'm talking about where did the political ideas come from? Where do the ideas of government and governing philosophy and culture come from? Um, you could argue that this is basically just a history of the United States, but I'm specifically focusing on what sort of governmental ideas and governmental philosophy have arisen in the United States as account of its history and why the United States tends to be the way it is, right? And hopefully this series will provide a better foundation for people who are maybe curious about why America does things the way they do. Maybe for Americans, especially hopefully for foreign viewers, um, I think it's going to be a very good idea. And you may be wondering, wait, why am I looking at a map of the colonial empires? And actually, I'm even going to talk a little bit about one native nation that has had a surprisingly large influence on the way America does government. Anyway, we're going to start with the colonial empires. And honestly, if I really wanted to, I could go all the way back and start with Magna Carta. But I think that's a little bit too far. Before I get too far into this video, a like, a comment, subscription would be greatly appreciated. And I want to thank everyone who has already done so. We crossed 600 over the weekend, and I am greatly appreciative. Don't really have any goals. 700 by the end of the year seems a little bit impossible, but 650 by the end of the year, that is doable, I would think. Well, at least try to hit 625. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get into this, and let's talk about the difference between how the French, British, and Spanish governed their colonies, especially and specifically on the mainland of North America. I'm not really going to talk a little about the Caribbean because all of the colonial empires treated their Caribbean colonies the same. The Spanish, what they did was basically set up missions and tried to exploit the mineral resources of the areas on the continent. And the reason why that was a thing was because the Spanish didn't really see much agricultural benefit in setting up an empire. That said, they did want Spanish people in their colonial empire. It's just they were very far and few between. This is why major settlements and major cities are so far apart. That and geography. And I really could talk about geography as the start of this. And we will when we get to how America became so powerful. And the secret to that is geography. The Spanish, what they did was they wanted complete control. Most, if not all, land was directly controlled or owned by the crown. Therefore, the people who lived and worked on that land were effectively serfs, peasants, whatever you want to call them. Um, Even the people who were actually Spanish from Spain. In certain colonial government positions, it was an asset to have been born in Spain. In addition, they prohibited firearms ownership, and that necessitated the Spanish asserting a massive colonial army. They had to have a large military presence in the New World, and that was expensive. One of the reasons why they needed the mineral resources, mostly gold. And their government was pretty darn harsh. Not nearly European powers in Africa harsh, but it was harsh. Not Belgian Congo, punitive. Anyway, moving on to the French, they had a few Caribbean islands until the British took those from the French after the 7 Years' War, which is over the Ohio River Valley. But at least that was the start of the 7 Years' War. The French, they didn't want their Caribbean empire to be cut off from their empire in what is now Canada and Quebec. So they sought to control the Mississippi once they found it. And to do that, they established the port at Nolens, which is why that city is where it is. And they also were keen on controlling any of the upstream rivers to ensure that they could trade goods from the Caribbean to Canada without having to go around the British colonies, which we'll get to in a second. But these were also very sparsely populated outside of the St. Lawrence River Valley, which is right in this area, right here. And really the only major settlements that were there at the time of the 7 Years' War was Quebec City, which is somewhere up in here, and Montreal, or Montreal, as we Americans know it, right? So, basically, the French, they just had the Mississippi and most of its drainage basin, as well as the St. Lawrence River. The British, they wound up getting this land to the east of the Appalachians and to the coast and north of Florida. And yeah, what they got was probably not necessarily the largest expanse of territory, but maybe the best territory for setting up a colonial empire, because it was fertile, meaning you could actually farm there. Just like the rest of the continent, there was enough mineral resources, especially once you got into the Appalachians. There was a lot of coal. But there wasn't a ton of mineral resources. Instead, it was great for agriculture, timber, fishing, trade, especially considering all of the inland ports like Boston, Providence, various places along Connecticut, the Hudson, so that's New York City, and Newark, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Dover. And then we go a little bit further south and we reach the Chesapeake Bay, which is home to the harbors and ports of Norfolk, Yorktown. At the time, it was a minor port. Not really anymore. It's now all moved to Norfolk. You go up the Potomac, and you can actually, most shipping can reach D.C. to some point, to some extent. But if you go a little bit further, you reach Baltimore and Annapolis. Chesapeake Bay is major. Then in the Carolinas, the Outer Banks, they shield a lot of that land and make that very decent for trade. Then you go down and you've got Charleston in South Carolina, and then you've got the Port of Savannah. And these are still all major ports for the most part. Boston, New York, Baltimore, Norfolk, Charleston, and Savannah are all very large ports in the United States. And because of the vast network of barrier islands, as well as the fact that most of these are actually inland from the main ocean. About the only real port that's not completely shielded is Boston Harbor, and even then it's got decent protection from the ocean. And of course, a lot of these were right next to decent rivers that were navigable a healthy way in. Now, up until you reach about this point in Pennsylvania, basically the dividing line between Philly and Western Pennsylvania, slightly joking. Um, Pen- but once you reach the Appalachians in Philly, this becomes a little bit less important. But in the South, there's something known as the fall line. And that's basically where rivers break into rapids and waterfalls don't and are unnavigable. Below that, they're navigable. And a lot of major cities got established along the fall line, including Washington, D.C., um, Raleigh. I think Richmond's a little bit downstream of that, but quite a few cities are actually built along that. And that also provided a major difference. Another major difference in the climates of the different British colonies, well, the northern ones were very similar to Great Britain. So these areas became known as New England. You had the mid-Atlantic, which did a little bit of everything, a lot of agriculture, a lot of trade, um, and stuff like that. The ones in New England were typically fishing-based, timber-based, and trade as well. Then you move on to the South, which has a much longer growing season, as well as soil and an environment that is more suitable for certain types of cash crops that were labor intensive. Those being, of course, tobacco, cotton, but also various foodstuffs such as rice, soybeans, okra, wheat, barley, oats, that sort of thing, and livestock across the board. But of course, because of the major ports, trade was also significant in the southern colonies. Now, the British, they took a much different approach. Now, maybe this was because the Brits had fought a lot of wars, or maybe because their home islands didn't have a ton of natural wealth. They decided that they didn't want to spend a lot of money on a massive military presence in their foreign colonies. So what they decided to do was tell any of their subjects who decided to become colonists, hey, bring a gun, and you know what? You own your land when you get over there. To the ones who could own land. And he said, you own your land. Use that gun to defend it against natives, against the French, whoever. Because it's your land, not just ours. And so that sense of self-ownership actually became significant, and it's one of the reasons why the founders of the United States were so heavy with mentioning and explicitly defending and talking about property rights in the Declaration, in the Constitution, in the Articles of Confederation, the state constitutions. Whereas if you listen to various nations that have come about from the French colonial empire or the Spanish, it's not really a thing that people talk about. Of course, most of New France is actually in the United States. But it's a different thing. And it's a different discussion. But the Brits also did something significantly different in that they weren't heavily involved in the government of these colonies. Sometimes this is called benign neglect or salutary neglect. Basically, you're on your own. We've got bigger things to worry about. Just keep doing what you do. Trade, grow things, expand, be profitable. And that's what the colonies did. And so each colony was able to establish some form of culture that was independent of their own. And that was very much of their own identity. But typically, the colonies within one area were broadly similar. For example, the New England colonies were extremely similar. Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, they kind of thought the same, they acted the same. Most of them were very Puritan. And the truth is, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island actually took a lot of their cues from Massachusetts, politically speaking. New York was its own thing. Pennsylvania was also its own thing. And that's partially because New York was centered around what has become New York City. And it was very much a trade and financial center, even in the colonial era. Pennsylvania was founded as a haven for Quakers. And they wound up having their own sort of thing. But Pennsylvania was also a lot more agricultural because it wasn't on the coast. Philadelphia, while technically a port city, was surprisingly far upriver on the Delaware. New Jersey was kind of like New York, but kind of like Pennsylvania. It was caught in between the two. Delaware was kind of overshadowed by Pennsylvania, but also Virginia, which was right near it. Maryland was founded actually as a haven for Catholics. Hence, Maryland. Virginia was the first colony, and it became an agricultural colony, and it kind of led and gave the cues to the southern colonies, except for South Carolina, which was kind of the deep south colony and was its own thing. South Carolina kind of thought itself as more important than the other southern colonies, except for maybe Virginia. While they did take cues from Virginia, South Carolina definitely was independent for sure. And it would be wrong to say that the southern colonies were subservient to Virginia. By the way, Delaware and Maryland are sometimes called southern colonies, and to be fair, it's kind of true that so much so that actually the U.S. Census Bureau considers Delaware and Maryland to be southern. Okay. And Georgia was founded as a prison colony, but that was pretty quickly gotten rid of. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video here, and next time we're going to talk about the Haudenosaunee, or as most Americans know them, the Iroquois. Take it easy, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.